In this exercise, we're going to create a database to store the vehicles. There's a bunch of different ways we can do this. In a monolithic style application, we might create a single database for mover and all of our data would go into there. That means that every part of the application is accessing the same database. We could also go for the microservices approach, which is that every microservice owns its own database. And so in that case, because we're operating in the vehicles bounded context, we might actually create a separate database just for vehicles. We're going to lean more towards that microservices approach. You can use this same approach in a monolithic style application by segregating according to different bounded contexts or different subdomains. So it doesn't matter really whether we're doing microservices or monoliths. The point is that we're going to create a separate database specifically to handle vehicles. Other parts of the application would potentially have their own databases as well. Now, before we do that, let's just list the files in this directory where we start off. Incidentally, this is the pre-built environment that I'm working in here. You can do this on your local machine as well, but I'm using the pre-built environment just for convenience. And you can see that we have a few different files here. We have a load exercise.sh, a load solution.sh, and then a folder for vehicles. There's also a cockroach.sh. Don't worry about that. That won't be in your local machine or even in the pre-built machine. That's something I created just for convenience here. But let's go ahead and run the load exercise command. And we're going to load exercise 1 because we're currently on the first exercise. You see that when I do that, it loads some tests. And so now if I go into the vehicles folder and I run test.sh, and you'll see then that it runs a bunch of tests, and it looks like I've got a failing test. So the failing test is here, and specifically the test that's failing is that it's looking for the mover vehicles database, but that database doesn't actually exist yet because we haven't created it. So let's go ahead and do that. Okay, so let's switch over to our code window here. And this is where we actually have the code. You can see that we have a bunch of different files, SQL files. We're going to open the create database SQL file. And so here, what we're going to do is we're going to write the SQL code that would create a database. So what does that look like? Well, we'll do a create database. And then we need a name for the database. Remember from the test, the name that we want is mover vehicles. And a semicolon at the end there. And theoretically, that should be it. But first, let's go up here and you can see this little icon. I'm going to save the file. And then I'm going to jump back over to my terminal where I had my failing test. And I'm going to run the tests again just to see if anything has changed. So you can see now that I've done that, the test has gone green. So I've written the correct code. Now what I want to do is I want to actually execute that inside of my Cockroach DB shell. Okay, so let's go ahead and copy my code that I've written. I've already tested this code, so theoretically it works, but let's actually execute it to see for sure that it works. So jumping over to my Cockroach DB terminal, I'm just going to paste that code in there and I'll hit enter. You can see no errors come up, so I assume that works, but how could I actually verify it? Well, there's a couple of ways. The first way is I could do a show databases. And so you can see here that we did actually end up with a mover vehicles database. So that appears to have worked. And then the other way that I could test it is I could just set that to my default database. So I can do use mover vehicles and execute that. And you can see when I do that up here, I was in the default DB. That was the context I was working in. Now we've changed to the mover vehicles context. So I've changed databases at that point, and now I'm working inside this mover vehicles database. So it looks like that worked. I have a working database. So everything's good and I can move on.